Welcome, sleepy summoner. You've traveled long roads today through thoughts, tasks, expectations, moments of effort no one else saw. The world may feel heavy at times, and your shoulders may still carry the echoes of the day. But here, the night has come to lighten the burden. Let your breath slow, let your posture soften, let your eyes rest, even if they are still open. You are entering a different kind of story now. One that does not rush, one that does not demand, one that unfolds the way dawn spreads across quiet stone, patiently, steadily, without hurry. Tonight, we walk beside a man whose strength is not loud. Xin Zhao is a warrior of Demacia, yes, but not forged only in battle. His power did not come from triumph. It came from endurance, from years of surviving, learning, bowing without breaking and rising again and again, with dignity intact. His story is not about conquest. It is about the quiet shaping of the self, the kind of strength that begins at dawn in an empty courtyard with nothing but breath and patience, the kind of loyalty that has no fire in it, only steadiness, the kind of courage that is soft and lives inside the bones. So let the day loosen its grip. Let silence settle around you like a warm cloak. The air is calm, the night is gentle. You are safe to rest here. We will step into Xin Zhao's world, slowly into cool morning air, into polished stone courtyards warmed by sunlight, into memories held like river stones worn smooth over time. No battles await you here, no noise, no sharp edges, just breath footsteps in quiet halls, and a warrior who learned peace not by forgetting his past, but by making room for it. Breathe in, let your chest soften, let your mind ease. Let us begin with Xin Zhao, Story 1. The morning in the practice yard. The morning air in Demacia was always cool just before sunrise. Soft light lingered along the horizon, not yet bright, not yet gold, just a faint blue-grey that made edges of stone and garden walls seem softened, as though the world itself had exhaled overnight. Xin Zhao rose before the palace bells sounded, not from duty, not from command, but from habit, the kind that had become bone-deep, steady as heartbeat. He dressed without haste, simple training clothes, tied with linen cords, sleeves rolled to the forearm. His hands were scarred in small, quiet ways, not as trophies, not as warnings, but simply because a life of discipline shapes the body the same way rivers shape stone. He stepped into the practice yard while the city was still sleeping. The flagstones beneath his bare feet held the night's coolness. The sky above him was soft, pale, waiting. No voices, no orders, no eyes watching. Just stillness. Xin Zhao stood in the center of the yard and let his breath settle. In, steady, out, steady. His spear rested nearby, leaning against the low wall, but he did not reach for it yet. The first movements were always done with the body alone. He lifted his hands and began. Not striking, not warding, but flowing. His motions were slow, controlled, and deliberate, arms tracing arcs through the air, steps light, posture grounded. The kind of movement that did not ask the world to watch. Movement for its own sake, movement for presence. The breeze stirred, carrying the faint scent of the palace gardens, jasmine, warmed stone, and the memory of last night's rain. The world woke slowly around him. A sparrow hopping along the wall, a distant horse stamping in the stable, a single leaf drifting to the ground. Xin Zhao completed a breath, a stance, a circle. Then, and only then, he retrieved his spear. He held it as one holds something familiar, not as a weapon, but as a continuation of the hand. The staff balanced easily across his palms. The blade caught the faint first light of dawn and glimmered, not sharp or cold, but calm. He began again, sweeping arcs, fluid pivots, firm grounding. Each movement was memory, not of war but of learning. He had once trained to survive. He now trained to remain whole. Footsteps approached from the archway behind him, soft, respectful. Xin Zhao did not need to turn to know who it was. Jarvan III always walked like someone learning how to carry the weight of expectation without letting it change his stride. The prince stopped at the edge of the yard and did not speak, did not interrupt. He watched first, not as royalty, as a friend. Xin Zhao finished the form he was in before resting the butt of the spear gently against the flagstone. He bowed not deeply, just enough to acknowledge presence and respect. Jarvan bowed back. "Couldn't sleep?" Xin Zhao asked, voice low, steady, warm in a way that did not need to be expressed to be felt. Jarvan gave a tired half smile, something like that. They stood side by side for a time, the sun beginning to crest over the outer walls, spreading gold across the courtyard like spilled honey. Jarvan spoke quietly. "You always look peaceful doing this." Xin Zhao considered before responding, his voice soft, not philosophical, simply true. "I am not peaceful because I do not remember hardship. I am peaceful because I no longer fight the memory of it." The prince breathed out a slow breath, not defeated, just thoughtful. There were no lessons in the words, no instruction, no correction, just presence, just shared morning air. "Would you like to join me?" Xin Zhao asked. Jarvan hesitated only a moment, then stepped forward. They trained together in silence, not war training, not strategy, just movement. Two figures in a courtyard surrounded by waking light. The world had not asked them to be anything yet today, and for now, that was enough. The courtyard warmed slowly as the sun lifted above the palace roofs. Not fast, not bright all at once, but gradually, the way a person wakes from gentle sleep. Light spread across the flagstones, turning dew into small points of silver. Xin Zhao and Jarvan moved in quiet rhythm. They did not speak. They did not need to. Each form flowed into the next, the spear tracing graceful arcs, the Prince-S wooden training blade learning the language of patience one movement at a time. Their breath was steady, synchronized in the natural way of people who had shared many mornings like this, even if neither of them had ever said so aloud. When they finished, they set their weapons aside and stood facing the rising sun. Xin Zhao let the silence settle before he spoke. "You hold your breath when you worry," he said gently. Jarvan blinked, surprised not by the observation, but by how easily it had been seen. "I didn't realize I was doing it." Xin Zhao nodded. "That is how worry works. Quiet, heavy, unnoticed until it shapes the whole day." Jarvan exhaled slowly, a true breath this time, one that traveled deeper. The courtyard felt different now, not empty open. Xin Zhao stepped to the stone basin at the yard's edge and dipped his hands into the cool water. He splashed his face, letting droplets run down the lines of his jaw, then offered the same to the prince without a word. Jarvan accepted. This too was a kind of training, not of the body, not of the spear, but of the heart. Together, they sat on the low step beneath the practice yard archway, where vines climbed slowly up carved marble. The city below them began to wake, roosters calling, market carts rolling, distant smiths striking metal, but their moment remained quiet, untouched. For a time, they simply watched the sunlight grow. Finally, Jarvan spoke not with formality, not with the weight of his title, but like a man asking something honest. How did you find peace after everything? Xin Zhao did not answer immediately. He looked at his hand scarred, weathered, steady, and then at the spear lying beside the wall. I stopped trying to forget, he said. Jarvan turned his head slightly, listening. There was a time I believed peace meant erasing the past, Xin Zhao continued. But a wound does not close by pretending it never existed. It closes when it is seen, tended, and given time. His voice remained soft. No flare of emotion, just truth. Jarvan nodded slowly, absorbing the words. And when it opens again, the prince asked. Xin Zhao smiled, barely the kind of smile shaped more by understanding than amusement. Then we tended again. The breeze passed through the yard, warm now, lifting the edges of their sleeves. Xin Zhao leaned back slightly, resting his palms against the stone behind him. There is no shame in healing many times, he said. It means you are still here. The prince lowered his gaze, breathing out, but this time, the breath did not carry weight. It carried release. Footsteps echoed faintly from the palace corridor, a servant approaching to announce morning council, or breakfast, or official duties waiting. Jarvan rose first, but he did not put the mask of the King's heir back on just yet. He placed his hand on Xin Zhao's shoulder, steady, grateful, real. Thank you, he said. Xin Zhao inclined his head. You are never alone. Not in this. Jarvan left toward the palace halls. Xin Zhao remained a moment longer, sitting in the morning light, listening to the quiet, feeling the world breathe around him. This too was part of his life now. Not the arena, not the shouting crowds, not the survival of the next moment, but presence. A warrior who had learned not only how to rise but how to stay. He stood, gathered his spear, and walked slowly toward the day, not as a soldier, not as a symbol, but as a man who had made peace his practice. Story 2. The arena remembered softly. The past does not always come as a storm. Sometimes it comes as a quiet door that opens on its own, in the mind, in the body, in the heartbeat, just before sleep. For Xin Zhao, the arena did not return to him in flashes, or in nightmares, or in shadows. It returned in silence, in the still moments after training, in the cool hours of night when the world was calm, in the steady rhythm of his own breathing. He sat in the royal gardens just after sundown, where lanterns glowed warm among the hedges, and the scent of jasmine drifted through the air. The palace was quiet tonight. Soft voices, distant music, a gentle evening. Xin Zhao rested on a wooden bench, spear laid beside him. He was not guarding, nor waiting, nor watching. He was simply being. His breath was slow, steady, even. The memories approached like distant waves, never crashing, never overwhelming, just rising. The sands of the arena were red gold, warm beneath bare feet. The air had been thick with heat and dust. The crowd had been loud at first, but with time, he learned to stop hearing them. He had learned to listen inward instead, to breath, to balance, to the quiet voice deep inside the chest that says, live, not win, not conquer, not overcome, just live. The lantern light flickered against his skin. He exhaled. A soft rustle came from the path behind him. He did not tense. He knew the steps. Jarvan IV approached slowly, not as a prince tonight, not as royalty, but as a man in need of quiet. He sat beside Xin Zhao on the bench. No words exchanged, just company. They sat like that for some time, listening to the river whisper beyond the garden wall. Finally, Jarvan spoke. Not loud, not careful, just honest. You were thinking of the arena. Xin Zhao didn't look away from the lanterns. Yes. Jarvan waited, not pressing, not asking, just making space. Xin Zhao let the silence shape his next words. In the arena, I learned how to remain alive in each moment, not by force, not by rage, but by listening. He touched the bench beneath his palm, feeling the grain of the wood, the warmth it had gathered during the day. Many believe survival is loud, he said, but the kind that lasts is quiet. Jarvan lowered his head slightly, a nod, a bow of understanding. Xin Zhao continued, his voice low, smooth, steady. There was a day when I understood I could not escape. Not yet, not then. So instead of fighting the walls, I fought the part of myself that believed I was nothing but what they made me. His breath was slow, even, grounded. I told myself, if I must stand here, then I will stand as myself, not as their weapon, not as their entertainment, but as a man who still belongs to himself. The lantern beside them flickered warm, steady, gentle. Jarvan's voice was quiet. That takes more strength than any victory. Xin Zhao let out a soft, almost soundless breath of agreement. It was not a moment of triumph, he said. It was simple, small, just a single heartbeat where I refused to disappear. His gaze drifted upward to the stars slowly forming in the darkening sky. From that moment on, every breath I took was my own. They sat in silence again. Not empty silence. Silence that held. Jarvan spoke after a while softly. And now? Xin Zhao smiled just slightly, the kind of smile made during a healing exhale. Now, when I remember the arena, I remember the man who refused to stop being human. The breeze carried the scent of night-blooming flowers. The river whispered. The lantern glowed. Jarvan didn't respond with words. He simply placed his hand over Xin Zhao, a gesture of understanding, not pity, not praise, presence. Xin Zhao did not withdraw. He allowed the contact, because now every moment of his life belonged to him. Every breath was his, every choice was his, every piece of himself that survived was his. The memory did not fade, it simply softened, and the night held them both quiet, steady, whole. Story 3. Tea at the western balcony. The western balcony of the palace was a quiet place, set high above the training fields and gardens, where the wind carried the scent of pine and cool stone. The balcony overlooked the rolling hills beyond Demacia, its outer walls a wide expanse of open land, where the sky seemed larger and the horizon a gentle curve. Xin Zhao came here when the sun was just beginning to sink, when the light was soft and golden, and the shadows stretched long and slow across the courtyard below. He carried a small tea tray with him, porcelain cups, a simple clay pot, steam rising gently from the spout. No ceremony, no servants, no formality, just tea. He placed the tray on the low stone table at the balcony's center, its surface worn smooth by weather and time. He sat on one of the chairs carved long ago into the stone, smoothed by the years of those who had rested there before him. A soft breeze tugged at his hair. The world settled. After a moment, footsteps approached, not hurried, not loud. Shivana stepped into the warm light, her armor loosened, shoulders unburdened. Her presence was quiet, grounded, like mountains and deep earth. She paused before taking the seat across from him. "You remembered," she said. Xin Zhao poured the tea, the stream steady, unbroken. "You come here at this hour," he said, "even when you believe no one notices." Her gaze softened. Not surprised, just seen. They sat together without speaking for a while. The tea was mild and herbal, the kind grown along Demacia's outer farms, where the soil was rich and the mornings cool. Steam curled into the air like the tail of a sleeping cat. Xin Zhao drank slowly, savouring the warmth. Shivana held her cup with both hands, as though anchoring herself. Below them, a few soldiers trained in the fading light, their voices faint, their movements measured. Horses moved in the stables. A blackbird called once from the garden wall. The world was quiet. Shivana spoke first. There are days when I feel I am made of two halves, and neither half knows how to rest. Xin Zhao listened, not to respond, but to hear. He set his cup down gently. You do not need to choose one, he said. You only need to make room for both. Her eyes lowered, but not in shame, in thought. That sounds simple, she said. It is not, he replied, but simple and easy are not the same. The wind moved again, carrying the warmth of the fading sun. Shivana breathed in, slow, measured. Xin Zhao poured her more tea without being asked. They drank in silence again, the kind of silence that settles when two people do not need to protect themselves from each other. After a time, she asked, how did you make peace with who you were and who you are now? Xin Zhao did not look away from the horizon. I stopped asking which one was the true version, he said. I began treating both as chapters, rooms in the same house. Shivana's fingers tightened slightly around her cup, and when one room feels heavier than the others, Xin Zhao lifted his eyes to hers. Then we sit in it, together, until it becomes lighter. Shivana's breath caught, just barely, not because the words were grand, but because they were gentle. The sun dipped lower, the sky deepening into rose and amber. The soldiers below finished their drills. Someone lit lanterns along the garden paths, and still, the balcony held them. No urgency, no expectations, just two people who had survived themselves and were learning how to live. Shivana leaned back in her chair, the tension in her shoulders loosening. Xin Zhao poured a final round of tea. They did not speak again. They didn't need to. The evening rested itself around them soft, warm, unbroken. And for a little while longer, they allowed the world to be small and kind and quiet. Together. Story 4. The Garden of Early Autumn. The palace gardens were always beautiful, but there was one season when they felt different, softer, quieter, touched by a gentleness that did not appear in summer as fullness or winter as stillness. Early autumn. The leaves had only just begun to change, not the brilliant fire of late fall, but the first shy hints of gold along the edges. The air held a coolness that brushed the skin lightly, like a memory of winter that had not yet sent its full chill. The light was warm, low in the sky, turning everything it touched into something honey-colored and slow. Xin Zhao walked the garden paths just after sunrise, when the world was still waking. Birdsong had not yet gathered in the trees. The grass was damp with dew. The fountains murmured quietly to themselves, repeating the same gentle syllables of water, patience, water, patience. He walked not with urgency, nor with intention, simply with presence. The gravel beneath his sandals made a soft sound, a whisper of movement, not enough to disturb the quiet. His breath matched the slow rhythm of his steps. Inhale, hold, exhale, release. The cool morning air filled his lungs and left without resistance. This was not training. This was returning. Returning to something simple, something the body remembered even when the mind was tired. As he reached the center of the garden, the hedges opened into a small clearing, a place Many at the palace passed without noticing. A round stone bench circled a pool of clear water, no larger than a dining table, where lilies grew wide and white along the surface. Xin Zhao sat on the bench, resting his hands atop his knees. The world breathed, and with it, so did he. He watched the lilies move with the faint ripples of the pond. Their petals were soft, layered like thin silk. Their stems swayed gently beneath the surface, rooted but free. He admired them for that, rooted and free, both at once. A small sound came from the garden gate behind him, not loud, but present enough to signal another person's approach. The kind of sound that did not intrude, but announced a respectful arrival. Xin Zhao did not turn immediately. He waited. A few moments later, he heard footsteps on the path, slow, even, considering. Someone who walked not to interrupt, but to meet the moment where it was. When the figure reached the clearing, Xin Zhao finally looked. It was Princess Shavana again, but different than before. Her armor was absent, her cloak left behind. She wore simple linen clothing, loose and quiet, her hair braided into a single braid that fell down her back. She looked less like a guard, less like a protector, and more like a person simply existing. For a long moment, neither spoke. Shavana moved to sit beside him, not close enough to crowd, but close enough to share the quiet. The pond reflected the sky. A bird called somewhere far above. The world settled back into silence. Xin Zhao spoke first quietly. Some mornings feel as though they are asking us to slow down. Shavana released a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it for days. Yes, she said, and I never know how to answer. Xin Zhao nodded, not in agreement, in understanding. You do not have to answer, he said. You only have to listen. Shavana looked at the lilies, their slow, easy drifting, and her shoulders loosened, just a little. Do you come here often? She asked. Whenever I feel myself becoming sharp, he replied. Her gaze shifted to him, not questioning, curious. Sharp? Xin Zhao looked at his hands. There are days when the world asks us to be swords, he said, to cut, to strike, to stand firm. But the blade grows brittle if it never rests in its sheath. If it is always meant to defend, it forgets how to touch gently. Shavana's breath trembled not visibly, but inside, because she understood, deeply. Her whole life had been a half-held sword. Xin Zhao did not look at her when he continued. In the arena, I learned to survive by being sharp. Every moment, every breath, every movement had edges. He paused, and when I came here, I did not know how to set them down. Shavana said nothing, and that silence was the right answer. The pond rippled softly. Xin Zhao's voice fell quieter. It has taken many seasons to learn that strength is not the sharpness of the blade, but the ability to choose when to sheathe it. A leaf drifted down from the tree above, turning lazily in the air before settling on the pond's surface. Shavana watched it move, slowly, softly. She spoke, her voice low, nearly a whisper. And what if the world keeps asking you to draw it again? Xin Zhao turned his head just enough to look at her fully. Then we remind ourselves that blades are tools, not identities. Shavana closed her eyes. For the first time in a long while, her shoulders did not look like they were holding the weight of two worlds. Xin Zhao reached down and dipped his fingertips into the pond. The water was cool, clean, still. He watched the ripples expand outward, spreading, soft, without force. We are allowed to be gentle, he said. The words did not fall heavy. They did not rise sharp. They simply rested. The early autumn breeze moved through the garden again, warm and cool at the same time, lifting the edges of their clothing, brushing against their skin, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and turning leaves. For a while longer, they sat. No lessons, no expectations, no masks, no weapons, just presence. The lilies drifted, the sunlight deepened, the morning unfolded slowly, without urgency, and two warriors who had been taught all their lives to brace, to guard, to withstand, finally learned, for a little while, to breathe. The stillness held them both without breaking. There are silences that are empty, hollow, restless, waiting to be filled. But this was not that kind. This silence was supportive, like a hand resting between the shoulder blades, steadying without pushing. The garden knew how to hold quiet things. The lilies understood, the water understood, even the air understood. Shivana spoke again, only when the silence had made space for her words. When I was young, she said, I believed strength meant not being touched. Her voice was steady, but quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from truths carried too long alone. I believed that if I let myself feel too much, or need too much, I would become unstable. Too much flame, too much fury. She looked down at her hands. They were strong hands, hands made for battle, hands that held back fire every day. Xin Zhao did not move, did not nod, did not hurry her. He simply remained. Shavana continued. I was afraid of myself, she said. Not what others saw, not their fear, my own. The words were not dramatic, they were simple, worn smooth by years of thinking them. The breeze passed again, lifting a strand of her dark hair. Xin Zhao looked forward, toward the pond, his voice low. Fear does not mean weakness. Shavana closed her eyes. I know, she said, but I spent so many years trying to be unbreakable. I didn't realize I was only becoming unreachable. The softest tremor not in her voice, but in the chest beneath it. Xin Zhao dipped his hand into the water again, the motion slow, continuous, and let the ripples travel outward. You do not need to be unbreakable here, he said. You only need to exist. Shavana's breath left her in a long, unsteady exhale, like something releasing its grip inside her ribs. She looked at him, really looked, not as a warrior, not as Jarvan's mentor, not as a disciplined guardian of the crown, but as someone who had survived his own becoming. How did you stop being afraid of yourself? She asked. Xin Zhao did not answer right away. He lifted his hand from the pond and held it in the air, droplets of water falling like tiny pieces of glass. When I was in the arena, he said softly, I learned to be two men, one who survived, one who watched. His eyes were distant but not lost. In Demacia, I had to allow those two men to become one again. Shivana's brow softened. And how did you do that? Xin Zhao looked down at his hand, strong, calm, steady. I stopped running from the parts of me that were shaped in pain, he said, and I invited them to sit beside the parts of me shaped in peace. He turned his palm upward, as equals. Shivana's eyes shined not with tears, but with something deeper, recognition, permission, belonging. The pond rippled again, soft and slow. A leaf drifted past, carried by the quiet. Shivana placed her hand into the water beside his, not touching, just near. Their reflections trembled together in the pond's surface. Two strong hands learning they did not need to hold everything alone. She spoke not to him, not to the garden, but to some place inside herself. I am tired of carrying everything by myself. And Xin Zhao, with no ceremony and no weight, replied, You don't have to. The wind exhaled, the lilies swayed, the world softened around them. Time moved but slowly, the way warm honey pours from a jar. Finally, Shyvana withdrew her hand from the water and rested it on her knee. Not clenched, not braced, resting. Xin Zhao rose first, only when the moment had naturally come to its end. He offered his hand not as invitation, as accompaniment. Shyvana stood beside him, balanced, grounded, whole. The two left the garden not as warriors stepping away from peace, but as people who had learned that peace was not a place to visit. It was something they could carry. Story 5. The Horse with the White Forehead. The first true chill of autumn came 2 mornings later. It arrived quietly, in the way the light sat lower in the sky, and how the mist lingered longer across the training fields. The air felt cooler even before sunrise, and the breath of the horses in the stables rose in soft white clouds that drifted toward the rafters. Xin Zhao woke early, as he always did, but today, instead of going to the practice yard, he made his way to the stables. The stable doors were open to let the morning air move through. The scent of hay and warm animals mingled with wood smoke from the nearby kitchen fires. The world was slow here, nothing rushed. The workers spoke in low, easy voices. The horses shifted their weight gently, hooves clicking against the wooden floors in steady rhythm. Xin Zhao greeted the stable master with a small nod. No words were needed. Routine had already spoken them. He walked down the row of stalls, each horse lifting its head slightly as he passed. Some recognized him and nudged forward in greeting. Xin Zhao brushed their necks gently as he moved, but did not stop. He was looking for one in particular. At the end of the stable, near the window where the morning light pooled in warm gold, stood a tall grey horse with a white marking across her forehead, shaped almost like a crescent moon. Her name was Silverstep. She was strong, even-tempered, and intelligent, but also wary. Not fearful, not wild, just cautious. She had belonged to a cavalry soldier who had died on campaign. Since returning to Demacia, Silverstep had allowed few to approach her too closely. Xin Zhao understood that kind of guardedness. He stepped slowly toward her stall and stopped just outside the gate. He didn't reach for her. He didn't speak to her. He simply breathed slow, steady, allowing the moment to settle. Silverstep lifted her head and looked at him. Her ears flicked once, then twice. Xin Zhao waited. He knew that trust was not something one claimed. It was something one offered space for. After a long moment, the horse stepped forward, only a single step, her breath warm in the cool air. Xin Zhao lifted his hand very slowly, palm open, fingers relaxed. No intention except presence. Silverstep leaned in, touching his hand with her muzzle, the contact soft, almost tentative. Xin Zhao exhaled. "Good morning," he said, barely above a whisper. The horse breathed out, and her breath fogged the air between them. He stroked her forehead, just between the eyes, the place where tension holds first. Her muscles loosened slightly, a quiet release. He worked gently, slowly, smoothing down the line of her jaw, along her neck, pausing whenever he felt the muscles tighten. He did not push. He simply asked with his hands and waited for permission. Minutes passed, unhurried, unmeasured. A stable hand approached, carrying feed. Xin Zhao lifted a hand, a small gesture, asking for a moment. The stable hand nodded and stepped back, giving them space. Silverstep nudged closer now, her body relaxing in small waves. Her weight shifted, her stance softened. Xin Zhao smiled, not wide, not visible from afar, but quietly. "You do not need to hurry," he said. "I am not going anywhere." He could feel it the moment when caution no longer braced itself inside her muscles. She trusted him, not fully, not blindly, but enough for today. He hooked a lead rope gently around her halter and led her out into the stable yard, where the sun was beginning to warm the cobblestones. The mist had begun to dissolve, turning the air clear and cool. He mounted her slowly, carefully waiting until she agreed. They moved through the palace fields at a walk, no urgency, no purpose, except being outside together as the day began. The rhythm of her hooves was soft, steady, grounding. The path curved toward the orchard. Leaves drifted from the branches, the first true fall of the season. The world smelled of apples, dry grass, and cold morning. They rode in silence. And Xin Zhao realized something gentle. He no longer felt like a weapon in motion. He felt like a man in peaceful company. Silverstep flicked her ears back toward him, listening, acknowledging. "Yes," Xin Zhao murmured. "I feel it too." They walked on as the sun continued to rise day by day, season by season, moment by moment, a shared life, quietly unfolding. The orchard path curved gently toward the outer palace wall, where apple trees grew in long, graceful rows. Their leaves had begun to shift to soft gold and pale brown, and each step Silverstep took sent a few loose leaves drifting from the branches above. Xin Zhao loosened his hold on the reins. He did not guide her. He simply allowed her to walk where she wished. Trust was not something that moved in one direction. The rhythm of her stride was steady, unhurried 4 beats like a long, slow heartbeat against the earth. The air grew warmer as the sun rose higher. Mist receded. The day became clear. As they rounded the bend where orchard met open field, Xin Zhao saw another rider approaching from the opposite direction. Jarvan. He was mounted on his own horse, a powerful chestnut stallion with a sharp, proud gait. The prince rode with practiced ease, but this morning his posture was not the rigid formality of duty. He looked lighter. Perhaps the quiet of the past few days had settled something in him too. Jarvan slowed when he reached them, raising one hand in greeting. Xin Zhao guided Silverstep to a gentle halt. Jarvan's eyes flicked to the grey mare, then to Xin Zhao, then back again. "She trusts you," he said. Xin Zhao rested his palm against Silverstep's warm neck. "Not all the way. Not yet. But trust does not arrive all at once." Jarvan nodded. He understood. It was how Xin Zhao had learned to trust Demacia, and how Demacia had learned to trust him. The prince leaned slightly forward in his saddle, exhaling, as though releasing something he had carried overnight. "Walk with me?" he asked. Xin Zhao inclined his head. "Of course." They set off at a slow pace, side by side, horses moving in near unison. The orchard closed behind them, giving way to open field. Wind moved through the tall autumn grass. Birds wheeled overhead, lazy in the warming light. For a long time, they did not speak. It was not silence between them. It was companionship. Jarvan broke the quiet gently. "I knew you would be here," he said. "Not accusing, not claiming, simply recognizing." Xin Zhao smiled faintly. "You know my habits." "I know your peace," Jarvan answered. The words held no weight of royalty, only truth. Xin Zhao shifted his posture slightly, adjusting for Silverstep's comfort. "You carry much, my prince," he said. Jarvan's hands tightened just a little around his reins. "Yes," he admitted. There was no defense, no denial, just honesty. Xin Zhao waited for him to continue, but did not press. Jarvan exhaled slowly. I am expected to rebuild what was lost, he said, to lead with certainty, to inspire, to be unshakable. He looked out across the field. But I am human, and humans are not made of certainty. Xin Zhao nodded once. There is strength in admitting that, he said. Jarvan let out a soft, unsteady breath. Perhaps a laugh, perhaps not. Some still look at me and see only the fall of my father, he said quietly. Xin Zhao's chest tightened not with pain, but with recognition. They do not know you, replied. Not yet, but they will. Jarvan looked over at him a long, steady look. You believe that? Xin Zhao did not hesitate. I do. Silverstep shifted her weight, ears flicking toward the sound of something in the trees. Xin Zhao placed one hand on her neck. She settled. Jarvan watched silently. You also believed I would grow into the man I am now, Xin Zhao continued, when I could not believe it myself. Jarvan S. Expression softened, not in pride, in affection. That was not belief, he said. That was simply seeing you. Xin Zhao breathed in. The moment was simple and true. The horses slowed as they reached the river that bordered the orchard. The water moved gently, clear, smooth, bright in the morning light. They dismounted in quiet agreement, letting the horses drink. Jarvan knelt by the water, cupping it in his hands, letting it run through his fingers. Some days, he said, I fear I may not be enough. Xin Zhao crouched beside him, his voice as steady as flowing water. You do not need to be enough for the world. He waited until Jarvan met his eyes. You need only be enough for yourself. The water rippled. Silverstep lifted her head, droplets falling from her muzzle like beads of glass. The sun warmed the ground beneath them, and the prince, for the first time that morning, breathed without weight. Not because his responsibilities had lessened, but because he no longer carried them alone. Xin Zhao stood slowly, brushing his hand once more along Silverstep's neck. We walk forward, he said, one day at a time, one breath at a time. Jarvan rose beside him. Yes, he said, we do. They mounted again, not as ruler and servant, but as companions. The horses stepped forward together, hooves soft on the dewy earth. The sun was higher now. The morning was warm. The day had begun, and neither man faced it alone. Story 6. The memory in the spear shaft. The seasons continued to shift. Early autumn deepened into mid-autumn, the leaves turning richer gold and russet. The breeze carried a cool edge now, the kind that hinted at winter without announcing it. The palace grounds grew quieter in the mornings as the days shortened. Even the birds seemed to speak more softly. Xin Zhao kept his routines. He rose early. He walked the gardens. He trained in the practice yard. He rode with Silverstep when the morning was kind. But there was one place he had not gone in many months. The old armory. Not the grand public one near the main courtyard, lined with polished shields and ceremonial banners. This was the older armory, tucked deeper into the palace grounds, a building built long before the current reign, its stone softened and worn by time. Most of the palace had forgotten it. Xin Zhao had not. He entered it on a quiet morning, shortly after dawn, when the halls were empty and the sun's first light slanted low through the high windows, turning dust into drifting gold motes. The door creaked softly as he pushed it open. Inside, the room smelled of oiled wood, cold iron, and old stone. Rows of weapons hung neatly on the walls: swords, halberds, spears, shields, bow stands. Some polished, some aged, some kept for tradition, not use. Each weapon had lived a life. Each one had belonged to someone's hand. Xin Zhao walked slowly between the racks, his steps silent on the stone floor. He did not come here to reminisce, nor to mourn. He came because the past had begun to stir, not painfully, not urgently, but like a quiet voice asking to be recognized. His hand trailed along the wooden haft of a training spear. His fingers paused at the curve of a shield. He inhaled, and then he found it. His spear, not the one he used now, finely crafted, balanced perfectly for his current role. This was the spear he had been given when he first came to Demacia. The wood was darker than most. The grain was tight, dense, beautifully smooth. The metal of the spearhead showed signs of sharpening and repair, but no neglect. The weapon had been cared for, even when he had not returned to it. Xin Zhao lifted it from its mount. It felt heavier than he remembered, not in weight in history. He closed his hand around the shaft and let the memory come, not as an intrusion, as a choice. The arena sands beneath his feet were hot, dry, coarse. The crowd, a distant roar, the sound of the sea against hollow cliffs. His body had moved then out of necessity, breathless, sharp, unbroken. But the memory he had chosen to keep, the one that came now, was not of violence. It was of a single moment, still and quiet. He had been standing between matches, the arena silent for once, the sky an endless blue dome above him. The spear had rested in his hand, familiar, grounding, something that was his in a place where nothing else was. He had looked at his own reflection in the polished spearhead. He had whispered, so softly no one could hear, "I am still here," not defiant, not triumphant, just true. And that truth had carried him forward. Xin Zhao ran his thumb now along the same place where his hand had rested, then the smooth, worn section of the wood where countless hours of grip had polished it. The armory was silent around him. His breath was steady. In, hold, out, release. Footsteps sounded softly behind him. Not someone who had come to disturb him. Someone who knew how to enter a quiet room gently. Garen. He did not speak at first. He simply walked to stand beside Xin Zhao, eyes on the spear. After a time, Garen said quietly, "I wondered if you might return to it." Xin Zhao nodded. My hands remembered before my mind did. Garen folded his arms loosely, not the posture of a commander, but of a man at ease. "That weapon saw you through the hardest transition of your life," he said. "It was the first thing in Demacia that belonged to you." Xin Zhao turned the spear slowly in his hand, the morning light glinting along the metal. "Yes," he said. "It was." Garen looked at him, then not at the weapon, not at the past, but at Xin Zhao himself. "What does it mean to you now?" Xin Zhao breathed in. The memory was no longer heavy, no longer sharp, no longer something that carved. It was simply part of him. "It means I survived," he said. Garen nodded, a slow, deep acknowledgement, warrior to warrior. "Would you keep it?" Garen asked. Xin Zhao considered. The spear had been a lifeline once, a tether, a definition. But now he lived in a world where his life was not survival, where his presence mattered, where he was not a weapon, but a man who chose how to stand. He smiled quietly. "I think," he said, "that it belongs here now, to be remembered, not relied upon." He set the spear back into its mount carefully, reverently, like setting a stone gently into the earth. Garen rested a hand on his shoulder. "You've changed," he said. Xin Zhao turned to him, calm, steady, grounded. "No," he replied, "I have returned." And the two of them stood together in the old armory as sunlight slowly climbed the stone walls, warming what had once been a memory of survival into something softer. a memory of becoming. Story 7. The letter never sent. The trees at the edge of Demacia's capital were different from those Xin Zhao had known in his homeland. The leaves here were broader, shaped like shields, layered in crowns that filtered sunlight into gold-dappled shade. The wind smelled of pine resin and cool stone. It was clean, crisp, as if the air had been held in still water before being released into the sky. Xin Zhao walked the path alone. It was late afternoon, the sun low enough that the light had turned warm and amber, stretching shadows long across the ground. Autumn had settled fully now. The air carried the faintest hint of winter. The grass beneath his feet made a soft, whispering sound. He walked toward a small outpost just beyond the palace grounds, not a place of strategic importance, but one of quiet routine. Messengers passed through here. Letters traveled. News flowed from distant villages, border towns, faraway farms. But Xin Zhao came here for something different. He came for the writing room, a modest stone building with 2 windows and a door that opened softly on well-oiled hinges. Inside, there was a table, an ink pot, a bundle of quill pens, and a stack of blank parchment, all kept tidy by someone who understood the dignity of stillness. Xin Zhao stepped inside. The room held the scent of paper and dust warmed by afternoon light. The window was open just enough to let in the sound of river reeds rustling in the breeze. He sat at the table. No urgency, no hesitation. He knew why he had come. He reached for a sheet of parchment and laid it flat. He dipped the quill into the ink, letting a small drop form before touching it to the page. For a moment, he did not write. He simply breathed. And then, slowly, his hand moved to my homeland, whose name I have not spoken aloud in many years. The ink flowed smoothly, dark against the pale parchment. He wrote slowly, not out of difficulty, but out of care. I remember the sound of the river outside the village walls. I remember the heat of the summers and the taste of the fruit sold in the market stalls. I remember the flagstones warmed by the sun and the way children laughed in the streets. His handwriting was steady, each stroke deliberate, shaped by discipline rather than haste. I have been gone a long time. I do not know if anyone I once knew remains. I do not know if the market still stands, or if the river has shifted its banks, or if the house where I lived has been rebuilt, repainted, or forgotten. The quill paused. A breath. He continued. I do not write to ask whether I am remembered. I write to say, I remember you. His hand did not tremble. It simply rested. The window curtain stirred in a breeze. A bird called in a tree just outside the door. The world remained quiet, allowing the moment to expand gently. Xin Zhao resumed. There were years when I believed I would never leave the arena. Years when I believed my name was no longer mine. Years when I thought the past could only bring pain. The ink dried in thin strokes on the parchment. But I have learned that memory is not a chain. It is a place where the heart knows the shape of itself. He sat back in his chair, resting the quill. The letter was not long. It did not need to be. It held exactly the truth it needed to hold. The door opened behind him with a soft knock. He did not turn. He knew the footsteps. Jarvan stood in the doorway, saying nothing as he approached. His gaze fell to the letter on the table. He did not read it. He did not ask to. He simply placed a hand on Xin Zhao's shoulder. A quiet gesture. One soldier to another. One man to another. One heart to another. Xin Zhao looked at the letter again. The ink dry, the paper smooth. Not a plea, not a wound, a remembrance. After a long moment, he folded the letter carefully, not tightly, not sealed, and placed it in the small wooden drawer beneath the desk. Not to be sent, not yet, maybe not ever. Jarvan spoke first, his voice soft. You are not leaving anything behind. Xin Zhao nodded once, his voice gentle. I know. He rose from the chair. Jarvan stepped back to give him room. Xin Zhao placed his hand on the folded parchment within the drawer, a final touch, not of longing, but of acknowledgement. Then he closed the drawer. The past did not vanish. It simply took its place. The two men walked out into the late autumn air, where the wind carried the scent of river reeds and turning leaves. The sun dipped lower, touching the horizon in a gentle wash of warm light. The day ended softly, and Xin Zhao walked forward, not away, forward. Story 8, Shivana's Fire, Seen in Peace. Late autumn crept toward its end, and the air grew colder in the highlands north of Demacia. The mountains rose like quiet giants, their peaks dusted with the earliest traces of winter snow. Pines lined the slopes in deep green sweeps, their branches whispering with each gust of wind. The sky remained vast and clear during the day, but at night, the stars sharpened bright and cold and innumerable. Xin Zhao and Shivana rode together toward a watchtower that overlooked the valley. It was a simple structure, built of stone and timber, used mainly in summer months to spot travelers or smoke in the distance. Now it stood quiet, unattended, waiting for winter to claim it. Their horses' hooves moved steadily across the frost-stiff grass. Silverstep exhaled warm clouds into the crisp morning air, and Shivana's horse snorted softly, flicking its ears. The path was narrow but familiar. Xin Zhao had taken it many times during patrols, each season giving the land a new character. Today, the world felt still, suspended between fall and winter, not yet one, not yet the other. Shivana rode beside him in silence, not the silence of distance, the silence of understanding. They reached the tower by midday. It stood on a ridge overlooking a sweeping valley of gold and amber trees. Rivers ran through it like veins of glass, catching light that shimmered even in the cold. Xin Zhao dismounted first, tying Silverstep to the post. Shivana followed, but did not tether her horse. The animal stood calm beside her, accustomed to her presence. They climbed the wooden steps to the tower's lookout platform. The wind was sharper here but clean, cutting through all the noise a mind could hold. From this height, the world seemed wide, quiet, and deeply patient. Shivana rested her hands lightly atop the railing. It's a strange, she said softly. The world looks so peaceful from here. Xin Zhao nodded. The world often looks peaceful from a distance. She exhaled, long and slow. But peace is difficult up close. Her voice was not bitter, not heavy, just honest. Xin Zhao leaned both hands on the railing, letting the cold wood press into his palms. Sheaths are easier to break than blades, he said. It takes more strength to live gently than to fight. Shivana closed her eyes. The wind moved through her hair, and something in her posture changed, not visibly, not dramatically, but subtly. A loosening, a lessening. They remained like that for a time, watching the valley shift in the afternoon light. When the sun dipped low and the air began to bite with the coming night, they descended and gathered wood from the base of the ridge. The fire took quickly, dry pine catching with a soft rush of flame and warmth. They sat close enough to feel the heat, but not so close that it overwhelmed. The fire glowed a deep living orange, crackling softly. Sparks drifted up into the darkening sky, disappearing into the air. Shivana held her hands toward the fire. Xin Zhao watched her expression, quiet and steady. "You were worried," he said, not as question, not as challenge. Shivana S, hands lowered. "Yes." Xin Zhao did not ask why. He knew. Shivana S' voice was quiet, almost fragile. "When I breathe deeply, sometimes I feel it, the fire inside, and I fear if I let it rise, I will lose myself." Xin Zhao listened. The fire crackled. The wind shifted. The horses grazed in the fading light. He waited until the silence settled, not to break it, but to honor it before he spoke. "May I show you something?" he asked. Shivana looked at him, uncertain, but not closed. "Yes." Xin Zhao cupped his hands near the fire, gathering only the smallest amount of its warmth. "Do not push the fire away," he said gently. "Just watch it." Shivana's breath caught not from fear, from recognition. Her eyes narrowed slightly, focused. The flame flickered, rising, falling, breathing with the air. Xin Zhao continued, voice steady. "The fire is not trying to escape you. It is responding to you. If you tense, it protests. If you fear it, it strains. But if you allow it to exist without judgment, without force, it simply is." Shivana swallowed slowly. She extended her hand toward the flame, not close enough to burn, but close enough to feel its heat. Her breath wavered once, then steadied. The flame did not surge. It did not roar. It did not answer with fury. It simply burned, alive, present, unthreatening. Shivana's shoulders lowered, as though something heavy had slipped loose from their bindings. When she spoke, her voice was different, softer, almost amazed. "It doesn't want to consume me." Xin Zhao's response was quiet, warm. "No, it wants to belong to you." The fire flickered, its light dancing across their faces. Shivana's eyes glimmered with relief, with grief, with understanding. "I've been trying to cage it," she said. "I know," Xin Zhao replied. "I once tried to cage my own scars." Shivana turned to him fully. "Did it work?" Xin Zhao held her gaze calm, steady, unwavering. "No," he said, "but learning to hold them gently did." The fire crackled again, not loud, just enough to affirm the moment. Shivana stared into the flame for a long while, her breath deepening, her body no longer braced. A transformation, not of shape, not of fire, but of acceptance. Night settled around them. The mountains stood silent. The valley breathed below. The fire burned steadily between them. Two souls, once defined by battle, learning how to be gentle with themselves and with each other. Story 9. The message from the border village. Winter announced itself first in the wind. Not in snow, not in ice, not in storms, but in a single morning breeze that carried the sharp scent of the far northern peaks. Xin Zhao noticed it while walking across the palace courtyard. The trees stood bare now, their leaves tucked into the earth. The sky stretched wide and pale, a quiet blue without warmth. The messenger found him before training began. A young rider, boots dusted from long travel, cloak stiff with frost. He bowed, breath cloudy in the air. "Captain Zhao," he said, voice soft with exhaustion. "A message from the border village of Ellerbrook. It was requested you read it directly." Xin Zhao accepted the sealed parchment. The messenger bowed again and stepped back, leaving him to open the letter alone. He broke the seal. The handwriting was careful, but untrained someone who wrote rarely or slowly. "The well has collapsed. The ground gave way after the first freeze. The winter ahead will be harsh. We ask for support, food, water, tools, guidance. We remember the kindness you once gave us." We hope it was not temporary. No name signed. But Xin Zhao knew who had written it. A small village elder with hands like riverstone, lined, strong, stubborn, but steady. A woman who had once offered him a bowl of soup without asking where he came from. He folded the letter carefully. There were some debts that were not owed but were honored. He went to find Jarvan. The prince was in council chambers, discussing supply routes and winter grain stores. The room was warm from the hearthfire, filled with a low murmur of voices, rustling parchment, the clink of metal seals. Jarvan saw Xin Zhao enter, and the tone in the room shifted not out of fear or formality, but respect. Xin Zhao did not interrupt. He waited until Jarvan's attention was free. When the prince approached, Xin Zhao held out the letter, letting him read it. Jarvan's expression softened, not in pity and understanding. "They asked for you," he said. Xin Zhao nodded. "I will go." "Not alone," Jarvan replied. Xin Zhao inclined his head, a bow of agreement, not subordination. Shyvana stepped from a shadowed alcove where she had been quietly reviewing maps. "Ialve, accompany him." Her voice held no hesitation. Jarvan looked between them, and something in his face eased. "Take what you need," he said, "and return when you are ready." The journey to Ellerbrook took 2 days. Silverstep carried Xin Zhao steadily across the frost-patched fields. Shyvana rode beside him, her posture alert but relaxed. They did not speak much, but there was no distance between them. The valley gave way to rolling hills. The hills gave way to sparse, leafless woods. Then, finally, the small village appeared, smoke rising thinly from chimneys, roofs dusted with frost. The well at the center surrounded by piled stones and collapsed earth. The villagers noticed them before they arrived. Faces emerged in doorways, hands lifted in small, cautious greetings, not desperate, hopeful. The village elder stepped forward, wrapped in wool, eyes bright despite age. "I knew you would come," she said. Xin Zhao dismounted and bowed his head, not low, not ceremonially, but with recognition. "You once gave me warmth when I had none," he said. "This is simply the world remembering." Her eyes glimmered not with tears, but with relief. Shyvana began organizing the villagers, moving debris from the collapsed well, clearing frozen clumps of earth, assessing the depth and damage. Her presence was calm, grounded. No one flinched at her, no one whispered. They had heard of her, but they saw her spirit before they saw her legend. Xin Zhao knelt beside the collapsed stonework. He ran his hand along the broken edge, slow, careful, listening to the shape of the damage. He spoke to the villagers in his quiet way, asking questions, not issuing orders. How long had the ground trembled before the collapse? Had the freeze come earlier this year? Had the river changed course? Each answer formed a clearer picture. Finally, he stood and spoke loud enough for all to hear, but still with gentleness. "We will not rebuild the well as it was," he said. "It would only collapse again. We will deepen it, widen its support stones, and brace the inner wall from below. It will last this time." The villagers nodded, relief settling into their shoulders. Work began. Not hurried, not frantic, steady. The people worked together. Children carrying small stones, elders sorting usable rock from shattered pieces, farmers clearing frozen dirt with spades warmed by their own breath. Xin Zhao worked among them, sleeves rolled, hands steady, movements efficient. Shyvana lifted stones too heavy for any other, placing them gently, as though they were nothing more than fruit in a basket. She did not breathe fire. She did not shift. She did not frighten. She helped. The villagers saw her, truly saw her not as myth, but as person. By dusk, the well stood reinforced, deeper and stronger than before. Water shimmered faintly at the bottom, clean, cold, alive. The village elder approached Xin Zhao. "You did not have to come," she said softly. Xin Zhao rested one hand on the stone rim of the well. "Yes," he replied, "I did. Not duty, not obligation, recognition, belonging." The villagers lit lanterns as night fell. Xin Zhao and Shivana shared a simple meal at the Elder S hearth soup, bread still warm, and quiet gratitude. No praise, no ceremony, just presence. As they prepared to leave the next morning, the elder pressed something into Xin Zhao's hand. A small carved figure, worn smooth. "A token," she said. "So you remember that you have a place here too." Xin Zhao turned it in his hand, the carving simple, shaped like a horse. Silverstep nuzzled his shoulder as though she recognized it. Shivana smiled faint but real. They rode away as the sun rose, the village fading behind them, the world stretching open ahead. Not heroes, not saviors, simply people who had offered what they had to a place that remembered them. And as the frost glimmered across the fields, Xin Zhao felt something warm settle quietly in his chest. He was not only surviving, he was part of the world. Story 10. The snowfall at Wingate Pass. Winter came 3 weeks later. Not suddenly, but in the quiet, inevitable way winter always arrives. The first snow fell during the night, a soft and delicate dusting that covered the roofs of Demacia in white. By morning, the air had changed. The world had become quieter, sounds muted, footsteps softened, breaths visible. Xin Zhao and Shivana had been assigned to check the watchposts along the northern pass, the long, winding trail that bordered the mountains and led toward the high plains. Wingate Pass was known for sudden weather shifts and steep drops, so winter patrols were slow, deliberate, careful. They rode out before dawn. Silverstep's breath formed steady clouds in the cold air. Shivana's mare moved with cautious grace, hooves crunching through fresh snow. The sky was pale and wide, washed in colors of pearl and early rose. The mountains stood tall, dark blue silhouettes against the morning light. Neither spoke much at first. There was no need. Xin Zhao's breath moved evenly in time with the rhythm of the horse's steps. Shivana watched the ridge lines, her eyes sharp, but her posture calm. Hours passed like this, slow, patient, unbroken. When the snow began falling again, it was light at first. Soft flakes drifted downward, weightless and silent, but the wind changed. The flakes grew faster, heavier. The mountains did not rage, but they shifted, as mountains do, into something stern and vast. Shivana slowed her horse. Xin Zhao did the same. "We'll shelter at the lookout cabin," he said. Shivana nodded. They guided their horses off the main trail, toward a small cabin built of stone and wood beneath a rocky overhang. The door creaked against frost, but it opened. Inside it was dark and cold, but the structure was sound. Xin Zhao stabled the horses under the overhang, brushing the snow from their coats, feeding them from the saddlebags. Silverstep leaned her head against his shoulder, warm and living. "You have always taken care of others first," Shivana said quietly behind him. It was not a criticism. It was an understanding. Xin Zhao exhaled softly. "It is how I learned to stay alive," he said. Shivana nodded once, a shared truth. They went inside. Xin Zhao lit a fire. The flames spread slowly at first, then warmed into a steady burn. The cabin filled with the scent of smoke and pine resin. Outside, the snow fell harder now, thick, white curtains sweeping the world into silence. Shivana sat near the fire, her knees drawn up slightly, hands clasped loosely. Xin Zhao sat beside her, close enough to share warmth, but not close enough to assume intimacy. The fire crackled. The storm whispered outside. Shivana spoke first. "My mother loved me," she said. Her voice did not waver, but it was quiet, and yet she feared what I was becoming. Xin Zhao listened, truly listened. She tried to teach me to control it, to hide it, to be small enough to stay safe. Shivana looked into the fire flames, reflecting like embers in deep earth, and then she was gone. A breath broke softly between her words. I have spent so long holding tightly to the fear she once held for me. I do not know where her protection ends and where my own fear begins. Xin Zhao rested his forearms on his knees, his voice low. "That is not something you have to untangle alone." Shivana turned her face toward him slowly, unsure at first. "The fire inside you," Xin Zhao continued, "is not a problem to be solved. It is a language you have not yet finished learning." The flames popped softly, drifting sparks upward. Shivana swallowed, not pain release. "I thought you would fear it too," she said. "I do not fear you," Xin Zhao replied, steady and clear. "And I do not fear what you are." Silence fell, but not the silence of distance. The silence of truth settling into place. Outside, snow pressed softly against the cabin walls. The wind lowered its voice to a distant hush. Shivana spoke again, quieter than before. "You have seen me in battle," she said. "You know what I can become." "Yes," Xin Zhao said, "and I have also seen you in peace." She closed her eyes. Those words landed somewhere deep, somewhere she rarely allowed others to reach. They sat like that for a long time. No lesson, no turning point. Just two people, warmed by the same fire, breathing in the same rhythm. The storm outside softened as night deepened. The world returned to stillness. Shivana leaned her shoulder gently against Xin Zhao's, not seeking permission, simply allowing herself to rest. Xin Zhao did not move away. He simply remained, present, steady, unshaken, the kind of strength that asks for nothing in return. And in the quiet of that winter night, with snow blanketing the earth outside and the fire burning warm between them, neither of them felt alone. Not anymore. Story 11. The Winter Festival Lanterns. Winter settled fully, laying a white hush over Demacia. Snow lined the rooftops of the capital in smooth, unbroken drifts. The air carried that clean, cold clarity only midwinter brings a stillness so pure it felt like the world was holding its breath. And with the arrival of winter, as deepest nights came the Festival of Lanterns. It was one of the few times the entire city seemed to soften. Markets closed early. Soldiers were given leave. Homes lit candles in their windows. Small, warm glows flickering against the snow-glazed glass. The festival was not loud or grand. It was not meant to dazzle or impress. It was meant to remember and to look forward. Xin Zhao walked through the city streets just as twilight began to fall. The sky above was deep blue fading to violet, and the first stars were beginning to appear faint, waiting for full darkness. The city was different tonight. Children carried paper lanterns shaped like birds, horses and flowers, the candles inside casting gentle amber light. Families gathered around street braziers, warming their hands as vendors handed out spiced tea and sweet chestnuts, wrapped in cloth to keep fingers from freezing. There was laughter, not bright and loud, but warm, small, close, the kind of laughter that belongs in memory. Xin Zhao walked slowly, his steps unhurried. His cloak hung heavy over his shoulders, the fur lining protecting him from the cold. Snow crunched beneath his boots in a soft, rhythmic sound. People greeted him as he passed, not with distance, not with reverence, just with recognition. A nod, a soft good evening. A child waving shyly before hiding behind a parentess coat. He returned each greeting with equal gentleness. He no longer stood apart from the world he served. He moved within it. At the marketplace square, now transformed into a wide open space of lanterns, and firelight musicians played quiet songs, their notes rising and falling like slow breath. The lanterns hung overhead in long, looping strings, each one glowing softly, swaying in the winter wind. They floated slightly, suspended from nearly invisible wires, so that the square looked like a sky full of stars brought down to earth. Xin Zhao stopped at the edge of the square, not to avoid entering, but to take in the moment. Children darted around in soft boots, their laughter trailing in little clouds of fog. An old man carefully tied a lantern to a girl's wrist so she wouldn't lose it to the wind. A baker handed warm bread rolls to a pair of elderly women who sat together by the fire. Life, simple life. And Xin Zhao realized quietly, without ceremony, that there had been a time when he believed he would never stand in a moment like this again. A time when the world had been noise and heat and survival and sharp edges. Closed his eyes and breathed. A familiar presence approached from behind, step soft, stride steady. He didn't need to look to know who it was. Jarvan. The prince stood beside him, hands clasped behind his back, gaze turned upward toward the lanterns. "The city looks different tonight," Jarvan said. "It looks like itself," Xin Zhao answered. Jarvan smiled quietly, like sunlight emerging through thin cloud. They stood together for a while, simply watching. Shyvana arrived moments later, though she did not announce herself. Her steps were silent on snow, her cloak dusted white. She joined them without asking if she belonged. She already did. Her eyes lifted to the lanterns. "They look like embers," she murmured. Xin Zhao nodded gently. "They look like hope," he said. Shyvana's breath softened something in her chest, loosening, almost imperceptibly. A child ran past, nearly tripping in the snow, and Shyvana instinctively reached out, steadying them with a gentle hand before they fell. The child blinked up at her, wide-eyed, waiting for something, fear, or warning, or awe. Shyvana simply smiled, and the child smiled back, pure, unforced, trust without hesitation. Then the child ran off to rejoin the others, lantern bobbing behind them like a small star in motion. Shyvana watched them go. Her voice was soft. "I never imagined being seen like this." Xin Zhao spoke without looking away from the lanterns. "People learn to mirror how they are treated. You treated them with gentleness. They return it." Shyvana was quiet for a long time. Then, "And you, do you feel seen?" Xin Zhao breathed in the cold air, felt it fill his lungs, clear and present. "Yes," he said. "Not loud, not dramatic, just true." And Jarvan, standing on his other side, heard the weight of that word, because there had been a time when Xin Zhao served Demacia, like a man standing outside a window, looking in, protecting a world that did not yet feel like his. But now he stood in the warmth, not at the center, not on display, just among. The musicians shifted their tune to something soft, slow and full. Families began lighting their personal lanterns, one for each person lost in the year, one for each person found, one for each hope held quietly in the heart. Xin Zhao held no lantern. He needed no symbol. He had learned to hold his memories gently, not to forget them, and not to live inside them. Shivana, however, held a lantern in both hands, a simple sphere of pale paper. She looked at Xin Zhao first, not asking, inviting. Xin Zhao reached out. Together they lifted the lantern into the cold night air. It rose slowly, flame flickering warm inside like breath, like presence, like belonging. The lantern joined the hundreds already drifting upward, glowing softly, lifting quietly, carrying nothing but the wish that came from simply being alive in the same world as others. They watched it rise higher and higher until it was just one more warm star in a sky full of them. No words were needed. The night held them all, and Xin Zhao knew he was not outside his life anymore. He was living it. Story 12. The Lesson of the Empty Scabbard. The winter festival faded into memory, and the days settled into their quiet rhythm once more. Snow continued to fall in gentle intervals, layering the palace grounds in soft white. The mornings were hushed beneath the weight of the season, and even the birdsong was subdued, as though the world had decided to speak more softly for a while. Xin Zhao woke before sunrise, as he always did, but this morning he did not go to the practice yard alone. The young guardsman Therin, barely past adolescence, new to the royal guard, full of earnestness and unpolished strength, had approached him the previous afternoon. He had bowed too deeply, stumbled through his greeting, and finally managed. I want to learn how to fight like you." Xin Zhao had watched him quietly, taking in not the request, but the heart behind it. He had nodded, not in approval, in agreement. So now the two of them walked the snow-covered path to the training yard together. The sky was a muted grey blue. The kind that comes before dawn has gathered enough strength to brighten. Their breath rose in pale clouds. The courtyard stones were dusted white, the familiar practice ring, now a gentle circle traced in snow. Therein stood shivering slightly, not from cold, but from nerves. Xin Zhao laid his spear against the training post. Therein blinked. "We not using weapons?" Xin Zhao shook his head once. "You believe the spear is where strength comes from," he said. "But the spear is only an extension of the hand." Therein opened his mouth, then closed it, unsure. Xin Zhao stepped into the center of the ring and gestured for Therin to follow. "Draw your sword." Therin obeyed the young blade, whispering free of its scabbard, reflecting the pale morning light. Xin Zhao stood unarmed. No stance of challenge, no readiness to strike, just presence. "Now," Xin Zhao said, "strike me." Therin hesitated. Xin Zhao nodded once. "Strike." Therin moved nervous, but sincere, a conservative swing. Xin Zhao stepped aside. Not fast, not forceful, just a shift of weight, a breath, again. Therin struck, stronger this time. Xin Zhao turned his body a fraction. The blade passed harmlessly by. Again. This time, Therin put his weight behind the strike. Emotion gathered frustration, embarrassment, effort. Xin Zhao stepped inside the arc of the blade, placed 2 fingers against Therin's wrist, and stilled the motion easily. Therin froze, breathing hard. Xin Zhao released him gently. "Do you see?" he asked. Therin swallowed. "I don't think I do." Xin Zhao nodded. The answer was honest. "Strength is not force," Xin Zhao said. "It is the ability to choose where to stand." The snow continued to fall, silent and slow. Xin Zhao gestured to the sword. "Strike again." Therin did. Harder, determined. Xin Zhao didn't evade this time. He simply stepped into the movement, his presence steady, grounded. He placed a hand on Theron's shoulder, just enough to redirect his balance. Theron stumbled not because he was weak, but because he was led. As Theron regained his stance, Xin Zhao said, "You are trying to overpower what you can instead understand." Theron blinked, breath shaking slightly. "It feels like you are not fighting me at all." "I am not," Xin Zhao replied. The snow gathered silently at their feet. "Fighting is the last thing I ever choose," he said. "My strength is not that I can strike." He lifted his hand open, relaxed. "It is that I know when not to." Theron looked at him, the lesson beginning to form. Xin Zhao stepped back, letting the air breathe around them again. "Draw your sword again," Xin Zhao said, "but this time do not attack me." Theron hesitated, then sheathed his blade. They stood facing each other. No weapons, no conflict, just two people in winter stillness. Xin Zhao spoke softly. "Most battles are won before the first blow lands. Strength is in how you stand, how you breathe, how you hold yourself." He placed his palm lightly to his chest. "Strength begins here, not here." He nodded toward the training weapons. Theron lowered his head. "I thought becoming strong meant never being afraid." Xin Zhao's voice softened warmer than the fire that waited inside the palace. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he said. "It is the willingness to remain when fear arrives." Theron's eyes glimmered, not with tears, but with something shifting open. The young guard inhaled slowly, and for the first time, his breath didn't shake. Xin Zhao stepped back, retrieving his spear with the same calm grace he did everything. "Come," he said. "The sun will rise soon. Let us greet it standing." Theron stood beside him, not behind him, not below him, but beside him. The horizon warmed. Light slowly filled the courtyard. The snow sparkled in delicate gleams of pale gold. And Xin Zhao knew. Strength was not something taught in a single morning. It was something grown, patiently, like a seed learning the shape of the sun. Story 13. The visit from the scholar mage, Heimerdinger. The snow lingered for many weeks, and in that time, the palace settled into a deep, quiet rhythm. Fires glowed in every hall. Footsteps softened on carpets. Voices spoke low, as though the winter air itself encouraged gentleness. On one such morning, Xin Zhao was helping repair a training spear rack in the courtyard when a palace guard approached with a slight air of uncertainty. "Captain Zhao," he said cautiously, "you have a visitor." "From Piltover." Xin Zhao raised an eyebrow. He rarely received guests from Piltover, unless the matter was political or military. But the guard was holding a folded note, sealed with wax stamped in the shape of a gear, not the crest of any noble house. Xin Zhao opened and read, "Coming to Demacia on scholarly exchange. Would appreciate a conversation. Heimerdinger." Xin Zhao rested the note in his hand a moment. He had heard the name, of course, the prodigious Yordle professor, explorer of light, memory, and technology. A being who had lived long enough to understand time in a way most never would. Xin Zhao nodded to the guard. "Send him to the conservatory garden," he said, and the guard bowed and left. The garden was quiet for winter. Bare vines traced the stone arches. Fountains ran slowly, water thickened by cold. Snow clung to the tops of trimmed hedges like lace. Xin Zhao stood near one of the long stone benches, cloak wrapped against the chill. And there, nearly hidden in his cloak and bundled scarf, was Heimerdinger. Half his size, fur fluffed against the cold, goggles sitting atop his head like two small moons. "Ah, Xin Zhao, yes," Heimerdinger said, voice bright and warm despite the air. "Thank you for meeting me. Beautiful place, quiet, excellent for thinking, or unthinking, depending on the state required." Xin Zhao bowed respectfully. "Welcome to Demacia, Professor Heimerdinger." "Oh, please, just Heimerdinger," he said. "Titles are for symposiums and plaques, and I've long since run out of wall space." He climbed onto the bench with the dignity of someone who had absolutely done this many times before. Xin Zhao sat beside him politely, giving 3 times more space than necessary. Heimerdinger produced a small notebook and began flipping pages rapidly. "I've come to better understand how people recover from experiences that reshape identity," he said. "Matter of fact, we build machines to withstand stress, heat, pressure, sudden shock, but humans and yordles, we metabolize experience." He tapped his head. "Memory changes substance over time. Unlike metal, or sometimes precisely like metal, depending on the metaphor you favor." Xin Zhao listened. Heimerdinger adjusted his goggles and looked at Xin Zhao with eyes that were deeply gentle, surprisingly so. "I've read your history," he said softly. "Not the propaganda, not the battlefield reports. I searched for the spaces between." Xin Zhao said nothing. He didn't need to. Heimerdinger continued. "I am very old, and in that time I have seen many souls bent by hardship. Some break, some remain bent. Some," he looked at Xin Zhao directly now, "straighten by reshaping themselves into something new." Xin Zhao let the winter air settle around the words. He looked out toward the gardens, frost glistening like tiny stars along the stone. "I did not reshape myself," he said softly. "I simply stopped running from who I had been." Heimerdinger's ears lifted a sign of keen interest. "Ah, integration. Yes, very rare, very difficult. Most people attempt subtraction or replacement." Xin Zhao nodded. "I tried to discard the man I was in the arena. I tried to become someone entirely different. But both were incomplete. Only when I allowed myself to hold both truths, the one who endured suffering and the one who stands in peace now, did I feel whole." Heimerdinger took this in slowly. He reached into his small satchel and withdrew a crystal sphere no larger than a plum glowing with a faint amber light. "This," he said, "is memory light, used to help document sensory imprinting in the mind. I developed it long ago to understand trauma. But over the years, I've found that what people choose to place into it matters more than what it can show." He offered it to Xin Zhao. No instruction, no pressure, just offering. Xin Zhao held the sphere in one hand. Light swirled softly inside it, warm rather than brilliant. He closed his eyes. He expected images of pain, but what rose inside him was sand, warm under bare feet, bright sky, breath, and a voice inside him saying, "I am still here." The light pulsed once soft as a heartbeat. Xin Zhao opened his eyes. Heimerdinger smiled, not academically, not triumphantly, but like someone witnessing a flower open that had waited a very long time to bloom. "You have made peace with yourself," he said. Xin Zhao set the orb gently into Heimerdinger's hand. "No," he answered. Heimerdinger looked up, surprised but not confused. Xin Zhao continued, voice warm, grounded, true. "I am making peace, each day, each season." Heimerdinger let out a soft, deeply satisfied sigh. Yes, of course, peace is not a destination." He looked out at the snow-draped garden. "It is a practice." The two sat together in silence. Not empty silence, living silence, the kind that grows roots. When Heimerdinger finally hopped down from the bench, gathering his satchel and tucking the memory light orb away, he said, "I came here to study healing, but I think I have witnessed it instead." Xin Zhao bowed, deeply and sincerely. "You are welcome in Demacia any time." Heimerdinger smiled, whiskers lifting with warmth. "And you, Xin Zhao, are welcome to every morning you choose to live." He walked off, short steps muffling softly in the snow. Xin Zhao remained in the garden a while longer, breathing, present, and very much alive. Story 14. The night the helms were lowered. Winter deepened. The snow outside grew heavier, quieter, softer. The palace fires burned longer. Nights came early and lingered late. On one such night, Xin Zhao found himself in the barracks courtyard, a place normally filled with training calls, sparring clatter, the sharp rhythm of discipline. But tonight, the yard was still. Snow lay untouched across the stone, deep enough to muffle sound. The torches burned low. The sky above was a dark velvet bowl of stars. Inside the barracks hall, the soldiers of the Royal Guard had gathered not for training, not for ceremony, not for duty, for rest. A single long table had been set with simple winter food, steaming stew, dark bread, roasted roots, and hot mulled cider. No banners hung, no music played. It was not a feast. It was a night of breathing, a night of being human. Xin Zhao stepped inside quietly, snow melting from his cloak. The warmth of the hearth met him first deep and steady, not loud. Conversation was low, soft, like river water gliding over stone. Young guards sat beside veterans. Those who had never seen battle shared bowls with those who wore scars across their hands and faces. Rank mattered little here. There is a kind of honesty that only comes in winter, the kind shaped by quiet. Xin Zhao sat at the end of the table, as he often did, not because he did not belong, but because presence alone was enough. For a time, he ate silently, letting the warmth of the food soften the cold in his chest. Then, slowly, voices drifted into story. A veteran at the table, broad-shouldered, weathered, his beard threaded with grey, spoke first. "At Windermere," he said, looking into the fire, "I believed I would die." The table listened. No one flinched. No one dramatized. They simply made space. I looked at the man beside me, he continued, and he nodded. Not in farewell, not in fear, just I am here. And I thought, if this is where I fall, then at least I fall with someone who sees me. Silence followed, not heavy, honoring. Another voice, a younger guard, nervous but sincere, spoke next. "I thought I had to be unbreakable to wear Demacia-esque colors," he said. "But I've learned I only have to be willing to stand." Heads nodded, not in approval, but recognition. Xin Zhao felt the warmth of the fire against his hands, and from somewhere deep inside, from a place that once believed he was only alive to endure, words rose. He did not plan them. He did not prepare them. He simply spoke. "There were years," Xin Zhao said, his voice quiet enough that the table leaned in to hear, "when I believed that my life existed only in service to another's will, that my thoughts, my breath, my strength were not my own. No one looks away. This was not a confession. It was truth offered without shame. In those years, I survived because I had to. I stood because there was no ground to fall to." His hand rested lightly over his chest. "But here, I have learned something I did not know to hope for." The firelight flickered across the faces gathered around him. "I am not simply living," he said. "I am alive." A breath moved through the room, slow, shared, deep. Someone at the far end lifted their helmet, the steel catching the firelight, and set it gently on the table. Not cast aside, not abandoned, just set down. A symbol of rest. One by one, not planned, not asked, others followed. Helmets laid on the table, one after another, a small mountain of steel. The weight of duty removed for the night. Not because duty was shameful, but because duty was lighter when shared. No speeches followed, no toasts, no praise, just quiet eating, slow drinking, breathing in the company of others who understood what it meant to carry a heart through the world. In time, the fire burned lower. Lanterns dimmed. The night settled deeply around the barracks walls. Xin Zhao stepped outside into the snow alone. The stars were sharper now, the world silent except for the faint sound of wind moving across rooftops. He looked up. No prayers, no questions, just presence. Footsteps approached soft on snow. Shivana. She did not speak. She did not ask what was said inside. She simply stood beside him, their breath rising into the same cold air. Xin Zhao exhaled. "We are all learning how to rest," he said. Shivana nodded. "It takes time. And patience," Xin Zhao replied. "And mercy," she added. "Especially for ourselves," he finished. The night held them. Two figures in the snow. No armor, no weapons, just warmth beneath winter sky. And for a moment they did not carry the world. They simply lived in it, together. Story 15. The Spring Thaw. Winter did not leave all at once. It softened first. The snow melted slowly along the southern walls, forming clear, thin streams that traced paths between stones. The air remained cold, but the cold had loosened. The sky began to brighten earlier. The frost retreated from the branches of the trees, leaving behind buds so small they could be missed unless one looked with patience. Xin Zhao noticed these things. He always had. He stood on the balcony overlooking the training grounds one morning just before sunrise. The sky was pale rose, the kind of color that existed only for a moment before day began. The courtyard below was still, soundless, but for the quiet drip of melting snow. He rested his hands on the stone railing and breathed in the cold, not bracingly, peacefully. Behind him, footsteps approached slow, familiar, steady. Jarvan. He stopped beside Xin Zhao, leaning one forearm lightly on the railing. "It is changing," Jarvan said. Xin Zhao nodded. "Yes, the season is turning." Jarvan inhaled, chest rising with the cold air. "It feels different this year." Xin Zhao didn't answer right away, because he understood what Jarvan wasn't he saying. The city had changed, the soldiers had changed, Shivana had changed, he had changed, and none of it had happened in a moment. It had happened slowly, like thaw, like spring. "This winter did not harden us," Xin Zhao said. "It rested us." Jarvan's shoulders softened, a rare sight, a relief rather than a burden. "We should ride today," Jarvan said after some time, "to see the thaw from beyond the walls. I would like to know the kingdom with my own eyes again." Xin Zhao smiled not wide, but warm. "Yes," he said, "we should." They left the palace at mid-morning, the sun bright but still cool. Silverstep carried Xin Zhao with her steady, ground-sure stride. Jarvan's horse moved beside them with familiar ease. Shivana joined them, not called, not summoned, simply there, riding with the naturalness of someone who did not need invitation to belong. The gates opened, and they passed into the countryside. The fields were patchwork snow clinging in dips and shadows, while higher ground showed grass, flattened and brown but alive. Streams cut through the thawing earth in glittering ribbons, Birds returned in cautious pairs, settling on bare branches and testing their songs against the quiet. They rode without urgency. The sound of hooves was unhurried. The air smelled of earth waking up. After some time, they reached a hill overlooking the valley. Here, the snow had melted more completely. Green showed through not bright summer green, but the first green, the kind of green that means the world is remembering itself. Xin Zhao dismounted first, laying a hand along Silverstep's neck in quiet gratitude. Jarvan and Shivana joined him at the hill's crest. The wind moved gently across them, not biting, not sharp, just cool. The valley below lay wide and open, rivers swelling with meltwater, fields stretching toward distant forests. For a long while no one spoke. Silence did not separate them. Silence held them. Shivana's voice broke the quiet. I once believed change only came with fire. Xin Zhao turned to her, listening. But now I see, she said. Change can be this. She gestured to the valley. Soft, patient, slow. Xin Zhao nodded. Fire reshapes quickly, he said, but water reshapes forever. Jarvan looked between them, and something gentle settled in his expression. We've all changed, he said. Xin Zhao considered the thought. Then he shook his head, not in disagreement, but in correction, small and kind. No, we have grown. Growth was not something forced, not something demanded, not something conquered. Growth was something allowed, something welcomed. Jarvan breathed out slow, deep, letting the winter he had carried inside finally leave him. Shivana closed her eyes, letting the wind pass through her without fear of what might rise inside her chest. Xin Zhao watched the valley, feeling the world around him as part of him, not a place he merely stood upon. The three of them did not stand as warrior, prince, and protector. They stood as a man who had survived himself, a woman learning she did not need to fight her nature to belong, a leader learning to be human before he became legend. Spring would come fully in time. The thaw would continue. The ground would soften. The world would turn green and living again, and they would meet it together, not unscarred, but whole. Xin Zhao placed his hand lightly over his heart. He felt it beating, steady, present, alive, and for the first time in his life, that simple rhythm was enough. The lantern at the edge of sleep. The sun had set long ago, and Demacia lay under a quiet sky. The snow had melted, the grass was returning, and spring had come softly, not all at once, but in gentle breaths. Xin Zhao walked alone in the twilight, not the twilight of worry, nor twilight of battle, but twilight of completion, the kind that arrives after a long season of becoming. The palace gardens had begun to bloom again. Tiny white blossoms clung to the branches like soft stars, their petals stirred by a breeze that was no longer cold, just cool enough to remind the world it had once been winter. He carried nothing with him, no spear, no armor, no duty, only a simple paper lantern, small enough to fit in one hand. Its frame was delicate, its paper thin, painted with a quiet symbol, not of war, nor house crest, nor crown. A single circle, complete. He walked the familiar path to the same garden where he and Shivana had once learned the language of peace. The lilies were returning, shy green shoots pushing through the surface of the water, remembering the sun. Jarvan was already there, sitting on the stone bench beneath the early blooming elm. Shivana leaned against the trunk beside him, her eyes half-lidded, listening to the breeze as though it were speaking in a voice only she could hear. They did not speak when Xin Zhao arrived. They did not need to. He set the lantern down, a small pool of golden glow gathering around it. The garden, like so many moments they had lived, held the silence. Shivana opened her eyes first. "Is this farewell?" she asked. Xin Zhao smiled warm, soft, real. "No," he said. "This is simply the end of this season." Jarvan exhaled a quiet, contented breath. He understood. They all did. Every moment they had shared the courtyard at dawn, the fire in the mountains, the winter lanterns, the thawing valley. These were not chapters meant to close. They were foundations, roots, the beginning of something that would continue in breath and presence and gentleness long after spring had given way to summer. Xin Zhao lifted the lantern gently. The flame inside flickered not brightly, not weakly, steadily. "Summoner," Xin Zhao said softly, turning his gaze outward toward you, the one who walked beside him through every quiet step and every gentle unfolding. "Yes," he said, as though responding to a question deep in your chest. "I know you are here." He held the lantern toward the night sky. "You have watched. You have listened. You have carried weight no one else has seen. You have learned to soften where the world asked you to harden. The flame warmed. You have grown." The lantern rose from his hands, caught by a breeze that was neither hurried nor slow, just right. It drifted upward, joining the early stars. Shivana watched it go. Jarvan too. But Xin Zhao watched you. "The stories we walked through together," he said, "were not lessons to be remembered." He placed his hand over his heart. They were reminders of what was already inside you. The night deepened, not dark, but calm. The lantern floated higher still, its glow joining sky and silence and breath. Xin Zhao's voice lowered, soft as falling petals. "You have earned your rest, sleepy summoner." The garden rustled around him. The water in the lily pool shimmered. A warm wind sighed through the new spring leaves. "You do not need to guard yourself now. You are safe. You are home. The world can wait until morning." The lantern became a tiny star. The garden exhaled. Xin Zhao closed his eyes. "Sleep," he whispered, "and wake gently." And the night gathered you slowly, softly, warmly into its quiet arms.